We're learning Kuntres Acharon, the kind of last type of pamphlet that the Balatanya, the Alter Rebbe, he wrote, when he was writing his Likutei Amorim, the first section of Tanya. And he made notes to himself, and later they were discovered, and that's why they're called Kuntres Acharon. They weren't discovered when they printed the original Tanya. They were only discovered later. And we're in Essay 4. We're using the Lessons in Tanya's book. We're on page 352. So, the Alter Rebbe here, in this chapter, in this essay, I would say has 2 points. One is that the primary mode of tikkunim, of rectifications, of yichudim, is a different words used in Kabbalah. Yichudim, for the word yichud, to unify. Tikkunim from the word tikkun, to correct, to fix. These ideas, he says, are primarily accomplished through prayer, through avodas atfilah. There's 3 modes that they can be done, accomplished. Study of Torah, mitzvahs, practicing mitzvahs, doing mitzvahs, and davening. And the first part of the essay, he explained why it is that tefillah is specifically the mode that accomplishes the yichud in the best way. And that's why there are people that use different types of sidurim. You'll notice in certain shuls, there's a siddur called Siddur Harashash of Reb Shlomo Sharabi, Siddur HaShalov, the famous Shalom, Siddur Arizal of the Arizal, the Balatanya Siddur, etc. All of the Siddurim that I mentioned, except for the Balatanya Siddur, have the Yehudim as part of the Shmon Esrei, as part of not just the Amida, but also brachas. In other words, when they say Baruch Ato Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, how do you spell out that Yud Kei Vav Kei? So depending on what Yichud you're seeking to accomplish, that's how you spell out the Shem Hashem. Because the Shem Hashem can be written with Heys, with Vavs, and in various ways, as we've been learning throughout Tanya. So, tefillah is the mode of yichudim. And that's why you don't find people learning Torah and doing yichudim, and you don't find people doing mitzvahs doing yichudim. They just say one phrase. B'shem yichud kutche bricho shchintish yachtu shem yudke b'vavke b'shem kol Yisrael. Right? So we say it, as we've discussed in one of our shiurim, once a day. Others say it every mitzvah. But it's not as though when you do the mitzvah itself, there's some kind of yichudim. But when it comes to davening, because davening is the platform, it's the platform for tikkun and yichud. Torah is automatic. In other words, you learn Torah, and when you learn Torah, you accomplish a yichud. Do a mitzvah, and you accomplish a yichud. But in davening, it's not just say the words. You have to know what yichud and where and how. And that's why the Alter Rebbe, he said that the average person doesn't know this. And therefore, to kind of demand this of the average person in their daily davening is futile. It's ridiculous. So what should you do? I'm paraphrasing. He didn't use those words, but I'm paraphrasing. So what did Alter Rebbe say? I'll create a nusach based on the Arizal, right? Based on the Arizal, and it'll have automatically, through the choice of words and the organized and in a particular organized way, everything else, it'll have yichudim included, but not in a way where you have to know the yichudim and concentrate on the yichudim and actually say the yichudim. But regardless whether you follow the Alter Rebbe's nusach or you follow the Arizal or the Rashash, the platform for yichudim is tefillah. Now, one second. You might ask yourself a question. Am I really at a place in my life to worry about yichudim? And you know what the answer is? The answer is yes. Why? Because one never knows what aspect of the puzzle must be completed for the flow to come into their life. So, since we don't know, so one approach is just do all and every yichud as possible. Hopefully, the arrow will get its target. The other way is through the Balatanya's way. It's included in the davening, so you'll get it through davening. But whether it's the Rashash Arizal way, the Kabbalist way, Sephardic way, or it's the Alter Rebbe's approach, both agree that the platform is tefillah. Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that all of the nusachim make yichudim? The Ashkenaz, Sfard, Teimani, that they all, it's just a different nusach, but they all make yichudim.
Well, it's they only make yichudim if that's the way the ones who put the siddur together, if that's what they had in mind and that's what they knew and that's what they did. You're asking whether the Jews in Germany and Vermeise and France and those locations.
I recall an Asher from Barrel Wine that he explained it basically that I don't want to say it in a negative way, but that Nusach Sfard was was the easier way to accomplish the yichudim that come about through davening the Nusach Ashkenaz. Nusach Ashkenaz, it's programmed in, but that Nusach Sfard was, let's say, for the less advanced. I don't remember his exact. It was an easier program.
Yeah, I could see Rabbi Wine saying that. He comes from a certain background. I could see him saying that. I'm not sure. I don't think that's 100% correct. To go, because, in fact, according to the Munkatcher, who was a chassid and all that, but he writes that there's a serious question if you start davening Nusach Sfard, are you allowed to go back to Nusach Ashkenaz? And he says no, because Nusach Sfard is higher meaning in the sense it's more Kabbalistic. So that would seem to contradict what Rabbi Wine is saying. And the Rebbe writes in his letters.
I did hear from a very Litvish Rav that somebody who davens Ashkenaz can switch to Sfard, but not vice versa.
Exactly. That's what I just said. That's what the... Okay, and I'm telling you, I believe it goes back to the Munkatcher, who writes of Paskins that way. And the Rebbe writes in his letters, people asked him about switching from Svard to Ari, to Ari. And the Rebbe says, yeah, but you should know that once you do Ari, you're not supposed to, you shouldn't be going back to Svard because it's more Kabbalistic. That's my understanding. And the same is true with tefillin. You put tefillin on the Nusach Svard way, and then you want to put on the Nusach of the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, the Arizal, and the way they put on the tefillin where they make the shin and things like that. It's a question. It's a serious halachic question. Pashtus, you're not allowed to do it because you're not allowed to downgrade, only upgrade. Anyway, the point I'm making is so that I understand what Rabbi Wein said. I hear it. I would need to do a lot more research on it, which I don't have the time to do right now. But that's the Nakuda. So that was the first part of essay 4. The next part is about the virtue of mitzvah maisios, practical application of doing mitzvahs, Torah study of all the Torah of the virtue over the feelings of love and awe for Hashem. Now, to understand the virtue, you have to know what is it, this idea of Ava and Yira. And in a way, Baruch, much of Tanya, a lot of Tanya is dedicated to this idea of Ava and Yira. You know, my father would always tell me as a boy and a teenager how his mashpia, the known Chabad mashpia of Rabbi Chaim Kesselman, who was the mashpia in the Lud Yeshiva, starting from 1949, 1950. My father came there at 50, so he was there to 58. So he was there with him in prime time, and he emphasized Ava and Yira, and in fact, he used the psychological mode of lauding certain students, and he said, "Oh, this student has the Ava of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, the great Vizhnitzer Rebbe of Bnei Brak, Rabbi Chaim Meir Hagar, in the 50s, and who had thousands of Hasidim, and people saw him as he was a tzaddik and all that." So Reb Shlomo Chaim, to his group of Bacharim in the Beis Medrash Sheraf HaBrengen, he said, "Isn't this Bachar? He has the Ava like the Vizhnitzer Rebbe." That's pretty startling. But he used that, I'm not going to say as a ploy, but there's a word for it in English. I forget now the word. He used it as a psychological tool to get the Bachar and the Bacharim excited about this approaching Hashem with Ava. In other words, not just put your tefillin on, spend time in meditation, spend time in davening, thinking about Hashem's greatness and bringing to yourself a feeling of love, like you love something else and even more. And the same with Yira, having real Yira Shamayim. Right? So he used this as a way to build Ava and Yira. So Ava and Yira, Menashe, isn't small change. When we learn here in Tanya that notwithstanding the importance of Ava and Yira, love and awe, in your service to Hashem, mitzvahs maisios and study of Torah is not self, but God. And therefore, it's the ultimate. So I want you to understand that it's not, to appreciate that, you have to know what Ava and Yira is, and you have to be involved in Ava and Yira. The Rebbe, in a very famous mimer, and if you haven't learned it, you should learn it. I believe, Baruch, you've learned it, so maybe some of the others haven't. Maybe you make a shir with them. The mimer is called Loi Siyam Meshakela Bakara Bartzecha. The Rebbe said this mimer on the Pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim, 1952. And at this mimer, there was a very great masculine Hasidus. Masculine Hasidus means someone who was like a genius in Hasidic thought, Chabad Hasidic thought. His name was Rabbi Moshe Gurari. There's a Chabad family, Gurari. And Moshe Gurari learned by the fifth Rebbe of Lubavitch in Lubavitch, and he excelled in the understanding of Hasidus, Chabad Hasidic philosophy. And at the time, he was considered the individual who understood Hasidus best. Okay? And he had a son living in Crown Heights, so he came to the Farbrengen. He came to see his son, and he was there by the Farbrengen. I think it was the first time that he came after the Rebbe became a Rebbe. This was 1952. And the Rebbe said a Maimar Hasidus, Lo Yisiyim Shakela, on this pasuk, Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim, 1952. And the Rebbe discussed a very important and sophisticated and yet delicate issue, which is, does our performance of mitzvahs make a difference to God? And that's, I'm sure, a question that all of you, we've all asked ourselves, and we really want to understand it. And it's not just Hasidus, by the way. It's even if you learn a piece of Gemara, you need to ask yourself that question. Okay. In the middle of the Maimer, the Rebbe kind of went off on an emotional display of what was going on inside his heart. And this is the formative years of his leadership, where we know he didn't want to be a Rebbe. He didn't want to have all of this, onus, etc., especially as it became later, year after year. And the Rebbe, we knew that he loved learning. He knew how to learn. He loved learning, and he was by nature an introvert. Like, just let me learn. Let me be to myself, and let me go to my work and make an honest living. I don't want to live off the community. The Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't want to live off the community, my friends. He worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard as a draftsman, as an engineer draftsman in the 1940s, designing a certain thing for the Navy, for the submarines in the middle of the war. Okay? Why did he do that? You think that he couldn't get his father-in-law to get him some money? He didn't want to rely on anyone, not his father-in-law, not his mother-in-law, not Hasidim, not friends. He wanted to earn his own living, and he did. Until it came a point where his father-in-law, because of his health, just needed him to work full-time for him. So he got a meager salary. But that's another story. Anyway, so the Rebbe didn't have a chance to learn as much. And it really bothered him. And how do we know? Because if you learn this mimer, and you pay attention, you could see the pain that he has for not being able to learn on his own as much as he wants. And he expresses it in the mimer, again, without saying, I'm in pain, I want to learn more. No. He's saying the mimer Hasidus, but what's coming out are these godly words that his soul is feeling, and at the same time he says, but the idea of love, awe, will, and pleasure is not where it's at. For God, it's a great fascination, and it's a great high, but that's not where it's at. Where is it at? Ma'aseh HaMitzvahs, doing and helping, etc. And it's clear, anyone paying attention and knowing the background, that he's talking to himself, in addition to teaching our generation. This is 70 years ago, 75 years ago almost, whatever, teaching us the approach for our generation. In other words, until the Holocaust, kind of, let's use that, one kind of was more involved in self, development of self, and that was what God wanted, what Hashem wanted. Post-Holocaust, Hashem wants something else. Hashem wants to involve the world, to elevate the world, to spiritualize the world. And by the way, Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav, he had the same idea, but in a different from a different vantage point. Where he switched from Aguda to Mizrahi, and I'm not, taking political sides, that was right, that was wrong, because the Agudists will say, of course, that was wrong, the Mizrahists will say it's, of course, right. But I'm talking about, they asked him, like, what happened? And he wrote about this in his treatise in the 1940s. And he said the Holocaust, he made a change in me. And mind you, he didn't experience the Holocaust. He came to America, I think, in 1931. But the global impact, when a serious person thinks about it, says, what does Hashem want? What does Hashem want? And I would say, Chaver, the same thing with October 7th. Anyone that's serious should ask themselves, what does Hashem want with this? It happened. What does he want? And you have to make an honest assessment with yourself and your life, and then go with it. Now, understandably, with guidance from Torah and Rabbanim and Rebbes, but at the end of the day, the individual has to come to that. So I'm saying all of this because the Alter Rebbe now will conclude his thesis here that Torah mitzvahs is selfless, and Ava and Yira has some selfishness left, and therefore don't rely just on Ava and Yira, but make sure that you're involved in Torah mitzvahs. Let's learn now. Page 352. And this was the actual avodah of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, v'chol Tanoim and all sages of Amoraim, benigla, when it came to the real part of Torah, lahamshich Yisbarach, the purpose was to draw godly light, ulavarer biruri noiga, and to refine, purify what's called klippas noiga, the translucent klippa. Kol shmeshach zman hagolus, the entire time of exile, the sholta ilana the toivara. Look what it says. What dominates? What's active during golus? It is good and evil. Kamashikosuv, as it says, Eis asher sholat ha'odam be'odam. It's a pasuk in Koheles. And it says it's the time that evil man dominates the man of holiness. So during Golus, we have Sholat Odom, the Klippa, over Odom, the Kedusha. This is the ultimate purpose of the chain of descent, which brings the worlds into being. Sheyorat Ho'elyon Lamato, the one above descended below, V'yeloi b'tachtoinim, because he wants a dwelling place for him, for Hashem, right here on earth. Why? Kedei lahaleson, in order to elevate the world. Lemheve echod be'echod, it should be one in one. That the one of the lower level, which is called Yichud Tato, should become one with the higher one, which is known as Yichud Ilah. So this is the purpose even of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, right? Baruch, what do we say about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? Teirosu Nasai. His Torah was his occupation, was his job. So you would think that the purpose is to bliss out, to remain in a cave. No. The purpose of Reb Shimon's Torah was ultimately to bring Yichud of Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, oneness into the world. That's why the Gemara says in Shabbos, as soon as Reb Shimon came out of hiding for 13 years in the cave, what did he do? He said, "Oh, over here, a kohen is not allowed to walk because there's a body buried there." In other words, he brought tikkun to the world. That's called tikkun. He's revealing that this physical piece of earth, for a kohen, he shouldn't be walking here. That's a tikkun. And so he brought tikkun to the world. Let's continue. This is why we say that when we study Torah, we create angels ex nihilo, from something from nothing. Even if we're learning Torah without proper intent. Why? Not why. This is only spirit. Ruach is not included. The ruach of the soul is not included in the elikus. It's a manifestation, but it's not actual godliness. Let me explain that. The intended state is neshama, right? There's nefesh, action orientation. Ruach is emotion and orientation. Neshama is intellect orientation, i.e. godliness. The neshama aspect of our soul is the intellect, as the intellect already sees God, feels God. So the Alter Rebbe says that through learning Torah, we create angels, only angels. And even when you learn Torah of Shalei B'Kavana, so you miss it, you don't have the intent. The intended state, I'm reading the note on the bottom of page 353. The intended state is neshama, which is divinity. However, when the kavana is lacking and one's study is merely at the level of ruach, how are angels created ex nihilo, which when such creative creation derives only from divinity? How is that possible? Next page. Elofi she'afal pikein shem Hashem sheichin chulu. Because nevertheless, even though the words of Torah are studied without proper kavanah, the name of Hashem does dwell within them. As explained earlier, even a created angel is called by the divine name at the time that he's carrying out his mission, right? He called Malach Hashem. Malach Hashem when he's doing his mission. Because at that time Hashem abides within him, so too Hashem abides within the words of the Torah. Angels can be created ex nihilo. V'dai l'meivin, this will suffice for the understanding. So here we conclude essay 4. With Hashem, tomorrow we'll start the next essay. And for now, we have a chance over Shuas, maybe you can pick up the Tanya and lessons in Tanya and reread it, or maybe another sefer that explains, the overall purpose, trajectory of this Pedic. Have a great day, everyone. Sei gesund. Bye-bye.